Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Excited about today's show, folks. This is kind of the way we're going to do things. As you know, I've got a love of the paranormal. I've got a love of music. We're going to combine things today. And I had the privilege of reading a very interesting book. I sought this book out because I saw this book and I had to not only read it, but I had to get a hold of the author and I had to pick his brain here because I'll tell you, my parents had a love of Elvis Presley. And one of the things that our author says today in his book is you're either an Elvis fan or you're a Beatles fan. And you're one or the other. I find myself not knowing which camp I'm in because my parents were such Elvis fans that it kind of drove me away a little bit. So, but I did find a little bit of a fascination with him. So as I went to read about his perspective of Elvis, and I'll tell you what the name of the book is here, and it grabs your attention. And the minute I saw the name of the book, it grabbed my attention, and I knew I had to get a hold of Miguel Conner, our guest today. It's The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King. And I went, wait a minute, what? And then I went, oh yeah, you know what? When you think about it, yeah. It hits you right between the eyes, right? So let me tell you first a little bit about Miguel, and we'll bring him in and get to the heart of what this book is about. Because you think to yourself, was Elvis really a magician? When you start to break it down and think about it, yeah, he really was. But Miguel goes deeper into it. From the very beginnings, his very beginnings, from the moment he was born, something magical did happen. We'll talk about what that is. To his very death. There's something mystical and magical about that as well. To even what Dr. Raymond Moody says, Elvis actually showed up in people's near-death experiences. And he even showed up as a full-body apparition to people. There's something mystical and magical about Elvis himself. We're going to talk about that today with our guest, Miguel Conner. Let me tell you a little bit about Miguel himself. He's a writer, voiceover artist, and host of the popular podcast and Bite Gnostic Radio. His books include Voices of Gnosticism, Stargazer, Heretic, and The Executioner's Daughter. I want to welcome in for the first time to Darkness Radio, Miguel Conner. Miguel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me on, and how dare you not take a side? You are the heretic.
I know, I'm the heretic, aren't I? You know what it is, though? Okay, I will admit this much. Okay, so I'll go Beatles. I'll take a side. And the only reason being is that I guess as a kid, I was more enthralled with, now you're really going to hate me for this, Miguel. I was more enthralled with McCartney's solo stuff than I was the Beatles. I was a Wings fan.
Okay.
Oh, I'm that guy. I'm the guy everybody hates. I was a Wings fan. Do you
Great music.
Do you hate me even now, Miguel?
No. I mean, again, this is not something I made up. That's from a scene in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, the theatrical release. He later, like George Lucas, he removed the scene because, these directors. But that's where Mia Wallace, played by Uma Thurman, goes up to Vincent Vega, played by John Travolta, and she's filming us, and she gives a speech. There are only two types of people in the world, an Elvis people or a Beatles people. Right. They can like each other, but they are not the same. That will tell you a lot about who you are. And it's pretty open-ended, but it just made sense. I think it's true. And I know what an Elvis person is, but I still don't know what a Beatles person is. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole yet.
I don't know either, right? I mean...
Yeah, beyond words. Sometimes it's beyond words. It's just an experience, state of being. Who knows?
Would it... I don't want to cast aspersions, but maybe would the Beatles people be more free-loving hippie and the Elvis people be more... Would you say you can't say they're more grounded, can you?
No, I think the Elvis people are the shamans and the magicians of this culture, the American shamans and magicians. and understand technology, understand what the American ethos is, and so forth. So that's what I would put Elvis, although I'm not going to describe anymore. Again, I want the readers to make up their own mind, even with what a Beatles person is.
Yeah, fair. You say even coming into this world, Elvis had something mystical and magical about him. And I want you to explain what it was that was so mystical and magical about Elvis's birth that was different than everybody else. I mean, more than just being a twin and having his twin Jesse with him and the unfortunate stillbirth of Jesse. What was it that was so special about Elvis's birth?
Well, like I write in the book, it's almost like Elvis was fated to be Elvis. He could not be Elvis. And it started from the moment of his birth, perhaps before. One of the themes in the book is, can we escape our fate, or can we make a destiny? Are we all just like Oedipus or Elvis, and everything's set in stone? And like you said, from when he was born in his little shack in Tupelo, Mississippi, January 8th, 1935, they were so poor that they couldn't afford a hospital. They couldn't afford a midwife. So Gladys, his mother, is having a very challenging labor in their little house that has no indoor plumbing or anything. And the father, Vernon, goes outside to have a cigarette just to chill out. And all of a sudden, this blue alien light appears over the house. And this light, of course, freaks out poor Vernon. Suddenly, all sound is muffled. The sound of the coyote stops. The wind stops. And Vernon freaks out, and he runs back inside. And like you said, faces the tragedy of Jesse, Elvis's twin, coming out stillborn. And then 35 minutes later, Elvis is born. And it was right there. It was already set in stone, because as I speculate, or I let the reader decide, was this some sort of extraterrestrial craft dropping off their latest space messiah, which they tend to do, whether it's Elvis or Bowie or Jesus, whatever rock star is there to change history? Or was it a heralding star, like we see in so many of these myths and stories? There was, stars when Jesus was born, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. It's very normal to see the heavens welcoming this new historic figure. And this blue light, alien blue light, would follow Elvis all through his life. And I give plenty of examples from this is the power that he used to meditate and use magic. This was his favorite color. This was, it appeared in many times of his life, including the day he died. And alien blue light is very common in extraterrestrial literature. From the crafts to how the aliens appear. Even Whitley Strieber says when he'd go out to see the visitors, suddenly this blue light would appear. So you have this theme all throughout the book of the alien blue light, Elvis, and extraterrestrials.
It's interesting you say alien blue light, but at the same time, he tied himself tightly to spirituality. So are they one and the same? I guess I ask you this, and I want your interpretation. And I know you say you want the reader's interpretation. I know what I pull away from it. And I guess I can share that with you too, but I want your interpretation first.
Well, I mean, I don't think there can be an interpretation, because we live in times where the line between religion and ufology are hopelessly blurred. And people were grappling with the nature of angels 500 years ago. Now we're grappling with the nature of aliens. So your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I have my ideas. I'm more of a John Keel, ultra-dimensional beings, these intelligences. But and Elvis thought the same thing. That's what's interesting about Elvis, is that he had a very sophisticated view of aliens. Remember, when he started reading this literature and having UFO experiences, he had 3. this was a time when people thought aliens were like little green men and they had combustion engines and just very, very archaic type of views. But he was already speculating that they could be interdimensional. They had telepathic powers that were stopping us from destroying ourselves. He read von Daniget's Chariots of the Gods, and he said perhaps we are seated. The ancient astronaut theory works, and he read the Old Testament and saw that scene from Ezekiel and said maybe those wheels are alien craft and so forth. So, and he was a big Trekkie, big Trekkie, big science fiction fan. So he was speculating without having to take a stance what all these aliens were, and could the Book of Enoch watchers actually be some sort of aliens and so forth. So he was way ahead of the curve on this. And again, he never took a stance because he was always researching and trying to figure. He'd be more comfortable today on social media debating UFOs than he was in the early 60s. And as I argue, Elvis was just very advanced when he was ahead of the curve, whether it was martial arts, spirituality, alien encounters, all that. He was just, and they were part of his life the whole time.
I wonder too, there wasn't, because he was so tightly controlled by Colonel Parker and he was so tightly controlled by the studio system. It doesn't seem, I mean, there were bits and pieces where he would, he'd get a little bit of that message out there, but do you think if he wasn't so tightly controlled by the system, that a lot more of these messages would have got out, not just to the people around him, but that he would have been able to sit in front of a microphone and espouse a lot more of this?
I don't think so. I don't think they had such a hold on him. When he got into alternative spirituality and occultism, he drove everybody crazy because he wouldn't shut up about it. And suddenly, the parties were replaced by meditation circles, and the chats were all, well, Elvis with his book asking people about the nature of Christ, or can people levitate, or what's reincarnation? And he didn't broadcast it, but he didn't hide it. It became a passion for him. And he kept his music, or at the time he was just doing movies. So it's kind of like, give me the role, give me millions of dollars, and then I'm going to sit there and talk about the occult and do yoga and study Yogananda and read about Blavatsky and ufology and all that. So, but it did drive people crazy because it overtook him. Parker said he's on this religious kick. He almost quit twice the entertainment business in the 60s, one to be a Hindu monk and another one to be a Christian monk, because it became the most important thing in his life. He was still trying to figure out, why did Jesse die? Why did I grow up poor and now I'm the most famous person in the world? Do I have a purpose? Why did my mother die in the late 50s when I was just becoming popular? And even as a child, he was always very curious about the nature of things, the bigger questions of life. So it did consume him very much. And again, it drove people crazy. But he was seeding this. I mean, he, as many have noted, he was seeding what would later become the 60s countercultural movement. He was meditating in Yogananda's ashram years before George Harrison made an appearance. And he was talking about martial arts. Remember, martial arts was considered very fringe and controversial and exotic. And Elvis already had 4 black belts. So he was always there. But eventually there was a time when the Colonel and Priscilla and everybody put so much pressure on him that he didn't stop. He just went really underground. He started hiding the books in his Vegas suites and just keeping more of his mouth shut. But then eventually he got tired of that, and then he went full on again occultist. But he almost kept it separate. When you look at his Vegas incarnation in the late 60s, you suddenly go, wait a second, this really was completely driven and fueled by occultism. It just makes sense. He's dressed up as some space age shaman, and he's wearing the Mayan calendar or the Egyptian motifs. He's starting his shows with the theme from 2001 and A Space Odyssey. He's doing karate kicks. I mean, and there are stories that he would stop in between songs and do a Tibetan prayer, or he'd start meditating. I mean, and just the whole thing really is one sort of shamanistic space age expression. And again, on the side, he was always reading and studying. He would always have workers carrying 200 books on the occult everywhere he went, Vegas, studios, and he was always meditating, practicing magical rituals, astral travel, and he loved talking about it. But unfortunately, the people didn't want to talk about it in his circles. There's a story where he sent a friend to Manly P. Hall's office, and the guy shows up, and the secretary's like, "Mr. Hall is very busy." And the guy's like, "Elvis Presley wants a signed copy." And she like runs in. Manly P. Hall cancels everything, gets one of his books, signs it, makes sure it's delivered to Elvis. Elvis is so happy he had to go to the studio. He goes to the studio and he's like, "Hey, let's talk about ancient symbols and myths and all that." And of course, everybody at the studio is like, "No, we don't. We just want to make music and then go party. Please stop." But that was basically Elvis's life.
I want to take you on a side story here for just a brief moment. Recently online, I was there's a friend online who's on television. I don't know that I necessarily want to bust him out here on air, but he was taking a tour of Paisley Park and noticed on Prince's desk there was a first edition Manly P. Hall book on Prince's desk. Now, I have to ask you this, Miguel. What is it about entertainers, singers, in particular musicians? I want to bring it out with musicians, that they're attracted to Manly P. Hall. What is it about Manly P. Hall's message that grabs them by the lapels and brings them in? What is it about that message?
Well, he was really the first great cataloger of all these ancient mysteries and myths and histories that the world had never seen. And he opened people's eyes or minds to a world of, eternal symbols and arcane stories and all that. I mean, he was the scholar to do that before Joseph Campbell or Carl Jung or all of those. So he hit a nerve for so many seekers across the world. Yeah, includes Prince, of course, Elvis, so many individuals in the 60s and so forth. So Manly P. Hall is one of the goats when it comes to comparative mythology, alternative history, and all that.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that Manly P. Hall seems to be the one that when it comes to musicians in particular, they gravitate quickly. I mean, that seems to be one of the first that they gravitate to.
For sure, yeah. He's obviously dated because archaeology findings have changed, and Manly P. Hall also shed a lot of light on secret societies. I believe he was a Freemason himself, and also Manly P. Hall was a celebrity for a time in the 40s, I believe, and 50s. He was a rock star. I mean, his book was a giant bestseller, and he was in the newspapers and all that. So he was very available, again, to those who were seeking, like Prince or Elvis, or those who were thinking, again, different forms of metaphysics.
Yeah, absolutely. Switching gears a little bit here, I want to talk about what might have laid the seeds for Elvis to really start thinking outside the box. Because you think small town boy, poor kid, really, and what gets you from thinking in a narrowscape to narrow box, small house, thinking, I don't have much of anything. And how do I just get by in life, to thinking of big, wide philosophies and thinking of gods and whatnot. And I want to bring it back to a passion of mine, which is comic books. So I think you know where I'm going here, Miguel. Tell us a little bit about what got Elvis thinking outside the box when he was young. What was it that really shaped Elvis's thinking, even into his stage act? What was it that really got his juices flowing?
Well, we go back to Jesse for sure. As I write in the book, it's a condition called a twinless survivor. And obviously losing a twin is hard, but a twinless survivor, somebody who loses their twin at birth, is a life-altering effect. They're born with survivor's guilt. They are seekers because they're wondering how come we came out of the same womb within so much, one mated and the other mated. So it drove them. It really drove them. And that's very common with twinless survivors like Liberace, Philip K. Dick, others. The problem is that twinless survivors, they are seekers seekers. They want answers to the greater questions of life, but they tend to be workaholics, prone to addiction, and have problems connecting with the opposite sex. Again, Elvis is almost like Elvis had to be Elvis from the beginning. So that really drove him. And even then, he was always a curious child who wanted questions. There's a story that didn't make in the book about there was an Orthodox rabbi that lived upstairs, and he'd walk by, and Elvis would walk out as a kid and say, "How come you don't believe in Jesus?" And the rabbi was amused, and that suddenly having conversations actually became friends. The rabbi would look forward to coming home to have little 13-year-old Elvis to talk about theology. It made him really happy. So he was always curious. And he was also born with paranormal abilities, which he got from Gladys. She must have had some witch blood or something, because she could see things in the night, shadow people, visions, premonitions, faith healing. And Elvis adopted those too. But of course he was told, here in Mississippi, keep that under your hat, soldier. But he had those supernatural abilities. Of course, that drove him too. Poverty drove him too, because he wanted something better than having to be hungry at night and sometimes homeless, and just the horrible condition of people in the South during the Great Depression. And like you said, comic books was a big thing. Remember, comic books were not mainstream back then. This was edgy stuff for the dirty masses. It was fringe. It was, comic books were often banned in California and Louisiana. It was just, it was not proper to read comic books. But he loved comic books for the escapism. Remember, he was a science fiction fan, and the one he loved was Captain Marvel. And that's the most occult hero you could think of. I mean, Jack Kirby said he based Thor off of Captain Marvel because it was the most pagan figure he could think of. And remember the story. We know Captain Marvel DC today is Shazam, but back then he was called Captain Marvel with the lightning bolt, which Elvis would adopt at his own logo. But this is a figure. There's some guy sees a wizard. The wizard gives him the magical name, and he's turned into this figure that's a combination of Hermes and Hercules and Solomon and Zeus and all that. And Elvis felt this transformation, this being ability to change was so inspirational, especially Captain Marvel Jr., his name Freddie Freeman, who was a handicapped kid who would say Shazam and turn into the superhero. Elvis said if this poor outcast a kid can turn into this mighty figure larger than life, then maybe I can. It was a very symbolical inspiration. He loved the magic and the science fiction. So all these things drove Elvis. And by the time he was a teenager, he was already asking changing his position. He could astral travel. He confessed to one of his first girlfriends that he could leave his body and travel the planets, but he had to keep it secret. By the time he was in the army, he believed in reincarnation. He was reading alternative books like Khalil Gibran the Prophet. He was trying Eastern wellness modalities, but in the 60s, when he became disillusioned with his fame and money, and he met his spiritual teacher, Larry Geller, who was also his hairdresser, that's when he went to the races.
I never put two and two together until reading your book, between Captain Marvel and the way he dressed himself on stage and in his so hair. Obvious. And then when you put the parallels together between Captain Marvel, or even Captain Marvel Jr., and Elvis in his presentation, and I went, of course, it's so obvious, even down to the capes. And I went, come on, it's right there. And as I sat and I in my mind, I put the two of them together side by side, and I went, of course. And then you even pointed out the logo, the TCB logo. And I went, but of course, it's all right there. And I don't know why it wasn't so obvious to begin with.
So obvious.
Yeah. It's just amazing. Well, I tell you what, we're going to take our break right here. When we come back, I want to expound a little bit about some of the things you talked about. Elvis's ability to heal. There's some instances throughout his life where he would tried to, or I shouldn't say try to, he did. He did some hands-on healing. And there's some instances, some documented instances where he would heal people. I also want to talk a little bit later in the program about some documented instances after his death. There are a sliver of people out there who believe Elvis never died. We're going to clear that up here. But Dr. Raymond Moody released an entire book. Dr. Moody's been on this program about not only near-death experiences where Elvis has shown up, but also full-body apparitions of Elvis. And the fact that Elvis continued his work, his earthly work, and has come forward and assured people that there is an afterlife. And this, you know, I'm trying to think of a good way of putting this as we go to break, Miguel, this otherworldly Elvis. I think there's this outside, there's an outside image that people saw this entertainer who entertained the masses and had this sex appeal. And there's this eye candy, right? But there's so much more underneath. There's this deeper entertainer. And when we come back, I want to talk about the modality of that. We're going to talk about sex magic when we come back. Was there a conscious effort to use sex magic? I want to talk about that as well on Elvis's part. Did he use that in the beginning? Was it a conscious effort on his part to draw in an audience from the beginning? I'll ask our guest that when we come back. The book is a fascinating one, folks, and I encourage you to pick it up. We have a link in the description of this program. The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King. Miguel Conner is our guest. He's the author. When we come back, all things Elvis, including healing, magic, and near-death experiences. When we come back right here on the best in paranormal podcasting, this is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. My guest is Miguel Conner. He is the author of this wonderful book we're talking about today, The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King. Before we went to break, I was teasing that we were going to talk a little bit first about something that Miguel had mentioned earlier in the program, and that is Elvis's ability to heal, which you want to talk about something that was kept under wraps. I think there were some instances that I think not a lot of people knew about here, Miguel, and that is that Elvis did have the ability to heal, whether it be some people psychosomatic thinking that, you know, well, he laid his hands on me, I feel much better now, to his actual ability to lay hands on people and actually heal people. Can you give us one or two examples of that ability?
Sure. And for your audience, keep in mind that I didn't get this from the tabloids or YouTube conspiracy channels. Everything in the book I got from very lauded, copy-edited biographies that have been around for decades. Again, they've been edited. They're from people like Priscilla, Memphis Mafia. Some are written by very important historians, very sober historians. And I always use instances where he wasn't alone. So there are eyewitnesses. For example, Priscilla saying that he could heal her headaches at a touch and that he healed his grandmother Minnie Mae's arthritis. It was something he could heal hangovers, nausea. Ginger Alden talks a lot about that. But then, yeah, there are very more extreme situations of this power that he had. One of them is he's driving around Memphis in his limo and he sees a bus over the sidewalk and he sees the driver staggering outside with his hand over his chest. And Elvis is like, dog, he's having a heart attack. So Elvis jumps out and puts his hand, one arm around the man's shoulder and the other one on his chest. The guy looks up and he's like, oh my God, it's Elvis Presley, with the glasses and the side, handing him. And Elvis is like, it's going to be all right, going to be all right. And Elvis does. Again, usually the blue light, the alien blue light was summoned and suddenly the man's heart is healed. And somebody say, well, seeing Elvis in the flesh might have done that. It could have easily stopped a heart attack, but it worked. And then, Elvis was very nice. He stayed there until the ambulance came to check him out, and he had him. The other one, which is pretty startling, of many that I have in the book, he's walking around in his Vegas before a show, and he sees in the dressing room where his singers, the Sweet Sensations, are gathered around. They're all gathering around one of the singers, Sylvia Shamwell. She's crying, and they're trying to console her. And Elvis, of course, walks in and, what's going on, ladies? And Sylvia admits that she had gone to the doctor and she had very late stage stomach cancer and she was freaking out. And Elvis says, I'll take care of it. So he says, all right, let's gather around for a circle. And they put their hands on Sylvia and they just meditated. And Elvis said, it's going to be all right. The next day after the show, Sylvia goes to the doctor. Cancer is gone. So that's just one of the many incredible. And that's ironic. That's the one thing that he didn't have to hide when he was a kid. It was something that he and his family, because it was, faith healing is part of Pentecostalism and evangelical Christianity. But yeah, he was a healer through and through. Sometimes he failed, I think, when his friend was resisting it or something. But 90% of the time he could heal anybody except for himself, as we know this how the story ends. Well,
and isn't that the way though with most healers? You can heal anybody but yourself. I mean, you can never turn that gift inward.
No, it's like that myth of Chiron, the Sagittarius, who can heal everybody in Olympus and beyond, but he gets hurt. He can't heal himself and dies. And that's the part where I tie into what's called the wounded healer, which in tribes across the world, the shaman is chosen by someone who's extremely traumatized, handicapped, or just hurt, somebody who had a near-death experience or some trauma or something like that, because it is assumed somebody like, and Elvis is that way too, abused as a kid, poor, all that the channels of communication open. They can see the spirit world and they can draw upon it. And these shamans also have an incredible sense of empathy and caring, which even increases their powers. And they feel, the wounded healer, I can heal not in spite of my wounds and trauma, but because of it. That's my superpower. That's my Captain Marvel ability. And they feel that if they heal their own trauma or handicap, they will lose their powers and they will fail the tribe. So they want to heal others because of their pain, because they understand it, and because it brings them power. And we know many examples beyond Elvis, Jim Morrison, Sylvia Plath, James Dean, the guy. They know our pain because they are in pain, yet they have some energy, or their art somehow is able to heal us. And it seems they're almost like sacrificial beings, Mm-hmm. Some have called Jesus a wounded healer.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of abilities, I want to talk a little bit about abilities and gifts and whether it's conscious or unconscious. Now, you talk about in the book, Gladys, his mother, gives him a guitar versus another gift that he might have rather had, but he makes do with what he has, right? He sits down with this guitar and all of a sudden it's a natural thing, right? And he goes from there. Now, I want to ask you about this particular subject, the swiveling of the hips, right? It's the, he starts to, as you point out, he's learning music, he's learning in the church, he's learning, and there was no, what's a good way of putting this? There was no prejudice on the Presleys in the Presley's lexicon, so to speak, because they grew up in a poor area. They knew people of all races. And Elvis was enthralled with black music. It's what he saw. It's what he saw in the church, the gospel music. It inspired him, right? Mm-hmm. It spoke to his spirit. It elevated his spirit. So that's what he gravitated to. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Well, he saw an amazing story and an amazing pain and past in the blues and gospel and so forth. He saw the pain of the slave and the anxiety of the white farmer and those outcasts and misfits and people who were struggling in this American country who did their best, and these people that were always looking at God, at the spirits for inspiration and energy. So he really loved that, and he loved the energy, and he really started adopting it for himself. And as many have said, rock music is this fusion of blues with the plight of the slave, but also that African animism of the devil trickster and the spirits, plus also Pentecostalism or gospel, which is more of an experiential type of Christianity. Some scholars have said that Pentecostalism is like the ancient mysteries, except you're not possessed by Dionysus, you're possessed by the Holy Spirit. And people, other denominations used to complain that Pentecostalism was just mixing Jesus and sex, because you'd get grip and everybody's jumping and touching each other. And in fact, in these churches, whenever you were gripped by the Holy Spirit and you started dancing in the aisles, it was called rock and rolling. That was the term.
Yep.
And people who first saw people, artists like Johnny Cash and Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis used to go to concert. This is like a holy tent revival. So I say rock music was really a form of spirituality. And all these guys, Little Richard, Elvis, they knew it too, because they were all B.B. King. They all came from the same churches, and they all knew the blues. So this really was a form of spirituality, and Elvis loved that. And he never wrote his music, but he could understand the energy, the quest for God, the quest for wholeness, the pain that was in these songs. And he could bring it and tap into it and make it his own and express it in a way that nobody could. And remember, his first hit, the one that woke up an entire generation. John Lennon said when he heard this song, what did he say? Before Elvis, there was nothing. Same with Bob Dylan and others, was Heartbreak Hotel. Mm-hmm. And this is a song about somebody depressed who's going to a hotel to commit suicide. So right there from the get-go, there was this power with Elvis's music. And yeah, he would go to the black churches, gospel radio stations, and the tables were flipped. He had to sit at the back in the segregated place with the white folk, and the black people all got. But he didn't care, because he loved that music. He loved Spanish music. He just loved any type of music that was seeking a higher form of consciousness and the quest for God.
So he's getting the feeling. He's getting that. It's almost like he's absorbing the vibration. He's taking it, turning it around, and putting it back out. Right? He's a conduit.
That's what shamans do. They go to the spirit world, they come back with the information, the medicine, and they give it to the tribe. And remember, across the world, shamans are very much about theatrics and music. It's essential. They all look more like Elton John than they look like a witch doctor. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's what Elvis was doing, as I argue.
So as I bring this around full circle here, Miguel, I would ask you this. Did he consciously get on stage with the swiveling of the hips and use sex magic to try and entrance his audience, to show up in droves, to push the music out there and maybe make himself a little more popular than everyone else?
It probably was unconscious. I think the Baz Luhrmann movie kind of gets it right, where he was just so nervous. I think the swiveling of the hips was anxiety. I don't think he was trying to do Kundalini off the bat. It was natural. Most of what Elvis did was often natural. He didn't know how to read or write music. And that's here's the story. When he went to Sun Records and he did some tapes and all that, and the owner, San Phillips, wanted to get like a super group, like in Asia, or one of those groups, the Traveling Wilburys, and they're trying to put musicians. And the secretary, what this Elvis kid came in, and he's a good, he's good on the eyes at least. Maybe we could Milli Vanilli him or something. So he invites Elvis. And they're doing music all day, and Elvis is bombing. He is bombing. He can't get anything right. At the end of the day, Sam Phillips is like, I give up. Let's call it a day. He goes to the back to start putting tapes away and furniture and all that. And Elvis is sitting. Something came over Elvis. And Elvis came over Elvis because he suddenly decides to play a song that's very niche. You'd have to be a black person or an artist to know this song. And there's that song, It's All Right, Mama. And Elvis starts singing it, except something grips him. And you're right. Suddenly he's shaking his hips and doing the hiccups and then all that. And suddenly, and he sounds like his voice is completely alien. Some spirit came over, and Sam Phillips is on the other room and goes, that's the sound I have been looking for all my life. This is the sound of the future. And that's a kind of song that only Sam Phillips would have known. Nobody in Memphis would have known that song. So, and that record, he signed him to a record deal, and that song hit the top of the chart. So with Elvis, there's always something, it's almost like conscious or unconscious is almost cannot be described. It's like, it happened.
You also mentioned in the book there at the time, there's different artists that did have a problem, black artists that did have a problem and didn't have a problem with him. Ray Charles had a problem with him. B.B. King didn't have a problem with him.
Very much, very much. I mean, as there's the argument that he elevated this type of culture, black culture, and he made a lot of people millionaires. Let's not play around.
Right.
So that was good. And a lot of black musicians got jobs and DJs and all that. Then there's the other argument that he was stealing, and he was. I mean, he's a trickster. That's what you do. That's what David Bowie did, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles. They were stealing from the blues and country and all that. So he did, but he did fuse it with his own sort of Elvis thing. And I think it was a great thing. Sorry, tricksters steal. What did David Bowie says? It's not stealing if I make it better. That was his famous argument. And Elvis certainly did that. And again, he appropriated, he alchemized, and he created something truly amazing. But then again, not just elevated blacks, but elevated other groups. It gave young people a voice. It opened the doors for alternative spirituality. It gave meaning and hope to a younger generation, and certainly pissed off the status quo. We have to forget when he came out, it was a firestorm. The world had never seen anything like this, but he was also very hated. The government didn't like him. The churches didn't like him. There were articles saying that he was an N lover and a homosexual, and it was very intense.
That you used a very interesting word there, and alchemized. You could say alchemy was part of his magic as well, and that I like the fact that you threw that in there, alchemy. That's another thing you can add to the lexicon of Elvis as well. Let's throw this in here before we get to the last part of this, which again has to do with death, near death experiences, and whatnot, and in the end of his life. We've mentioned a lot about how Elvis looked at different cultures and different religions and theologies. But we haven't talked a lot about Christianity and Jesus and how he looked at that. We've talked a lot about Pentecostal, and we've talked a lot about his upbringing in the church, but we haven't talked a lot about how he saw Christianity and Jesus. Tell us a little bit about what his outlook was on Christianity and Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, Jesus was always his ride or die deity, but it changed. What happened is that, again, we're talking about him becoming famous. He felt he was betrayed by his denomination. His own pastor said he was tangled in a web with Satan. Billy Graham denounced him openly, the great preacher. Churches hated him, and he felt burned because he felt I'm bringing a beautiful form of spirituality, and I still go to church every Sunday, and my parents are with me. But he was betrayed, and he suddenly saw the church in a different light. And I have direct quotes. He said, they're just a business. They're using God and hellfire to scare people. And he got very angry and he was hurt. So he started turning away from Pentecostalism and Christianity. Also, he was so famous, he couldn't go to church. It's just not possible. So he turned away, and he felt empty. But later on, when he got into the occult, he found a Jesus that worked with him, from Manly P. Hall, Theosophy, Gnosticism, secret societies. And this was a cosmic Christ, that we all had the shard of Jesus within us, and we could access us for powers and glory and healing and all that. He loved the Christ consciousness template. He also loved the idea, which you find in occultism, that Jesus was simply a person, a nice guy who became self-actualized, remembered all his lives, saw the world, and became aware and awake, and was able to change history. And he loved that Jesus too. So what he found was a Christianity and a Jesus that worked with his evolution, with his metaphysical evolution and his worldview.
You also mentioned something interesting. What the moment of his death, I think you described it almost poetically. That's the only way I can put it. Can you describe that for my viewers and listeners? You mentioned he was dressed in
blue, of
blue,
course.
electric
Had
blue,
to be blue,
right? And
it was a ceremonial. Yeah, it was like a ceremonial, ritualistic, funerary day. As I argue in the book, he knew he was going to die. He was changing documents, changed his will. He was dropping hints to people like his spiritual advisor and others. He told his stepbrother, David Stanley, they were talking, and he says, on August 16, I'm going to be on a different plane. And his stepbrother's like, yeah, we got to catch a plane to Oregon. And Elvis just rolled his eyes like, no, he was talking about a spiritual plane. So he knew in that day it was all very ritualistic. From his pajamas, he manipulated the weather. He was singing songs, I think, with the blue in it. And there's so many other things that I break down. Even his death, if you look at it from a symbolical way, you can say, well, he died on the toilet. That's the throne. The king must fall. He was reading a book about the Shroud of Turin called The Scientific Face of Jesus. So in his last moment, he is face to face with Jesus. And so much more, that I say that he knew that his time had come, and it was time to travel to whatever next mission he had. And it's sad, because he had promised he was going to take Elisa Marie to see Star Wars, but he didn't.
Oh, that's sad. Yeah, you even mentioned that the last song he ever sang was "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue."
Yeah. I mean, it's very eerie when you look at it from a symbolical, shamanistic point of view.
Yeah, but I mean, you talk about someone who knows that their end. I'll throw up the air quotes. If you're watching video, you see me do it. They know their end is coming. The end is just the beginning, but he knows this. He knows that he's going to make this transition. He's preparing for it. And I guess in his world, it's really maybe a joyous thing, right? I'm thinking at this point, things here on Earth aren't getting any better, right?
Yeah, it just is. And you're on a vibration where, you're just leaving an illusion. You are part of the mind of God that has been excreted down on this world, and we're all here pretending we're human, and it's your time, your karmic mission is over, and you've got other things to do, and still, as we know, he's still working here, but just on a different vibrational level. But he's still busy, he's still around.
You also mentioned the age he died was important, 42.
42, yeah, that's a good point. Remember, he lived in Memphis, which was originally called Aktawi, meaning the land, the place between two lands. Elvis was always at the crossroads of everything. And of course, he loved the Egyptian motif. He loved ancient Egypt. I talk about some of the rituals like he'd do with Ginger. He would do a triangle over his head and say, "The power of Christ enter me." And he loved pyramids and over and over. But in ancient Egyptian traditions, 42 is a very important number. When you die, as Elvis did at 42, go to the underworld and either Mot or Osiris will be there to weigh your heart. And they will ask you 42 negative sins. In other words, they'll ask you, what are 42 things that you didn't do? Like, I never murdered anybody. I never cheated on my taxes. But you have to give 42. And if you do 42, then, the feather, your heart's lighter than the feather. You get to go on instead of being devoured by the giant crocodile. So, yeah, even his age is very suspicious.
Interesting. And then, of course, the one thing that everybody points to and says, well, of course, that can't be Elvis in the grave, is his headstone, which is his middle name. And you explain in the book why his middle name is the way it is. Can you tell our audience why?
Yeah, he never liked the spelling of his parents with, I think, the 1A.
Yes.
He wanted the biblical pronunciation or spelling, as simple as that. That was his decision, and he had it on his will, and that was that. So that's pretty simple one.
And it was supposed to be with 2 A's the entire time. There was just a mix-up when they filled out the
something like that.
Yeah. And it's as simple as that, folks. And even Dr. Raymond Moody came out with a book of encounters with Elvis after he passed away, which is quite fascinating. And again, I'm gonna refer you back to this wonderful book that Miguel has come out with. It's called The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King, which we have a link in the description of this program. Let's just cap one or two of these here, because again, I find these not only near-death experiences, but these full-body apparitions that have come back, and Elvis coming back and actually interacting with people that not only has he known but had brief encounters with. Maybe Miguel, you can tell us about one or two of these. The fact that there are so many of them that Raymond Moody put together a book is fascinating.
And there's much more. I mean, there are so many, and people are emailing me new ones. You can go to the Graceland website right now. There's a page dedicated to your Elvis apparitions. He's very busy, and he's been very busy. Obviously, it was very intense when he died. There was so much poltergeist activity with people he knew, like the radio exploding and sparks and electricity going out in ex-girlfriends' houses and so much. So, God, there's so many, and some of them are really beautiful and very touching, and some of them are incredible and very vivid. I mean, my favorite is, for example, the day he died, there was a farmer, and Elvis was always the most giving person, never asked, no strings attached, but there was a farmer who almost lost his farm because his tractor broke down in Memphis. Elvis wrote him a check for a brand new tractor and said, don't worry about it. But the guy's working out in the field, and suddenly turns around and he sees Elvis, and the farmer's like, hey, Elvis, what are you doing here? And Elvis is like, I came to say goodbye. And then the farmer hears his wife in the distance, turns around, his wife's running out of the house. Elvis has died, and he turns around, and Elvis is gone. So, and so many other beautiful ones. Like, for example, there's a lady who suddenly she was in her office, and suddenly Elvis walks in, and this is after he died. And for some reason, she's like, it was normal, and Elvis sits down and they have this conversation, and she says, on the day you died, two girls, young girls, were killed because it was such chaos that a car accidentally hit them. And Elvis is like, I'm really sorry, but I took care of these girls. And she's like, well, what are you doing here? And she's like, tell me about your life. And she's like, you know what? I've wasted my entire life. I'm a corporate girl of this and that, but I have no joy. And Elvis is like, Well, why don't you change that? Start living your life. And she said, all right. And then he walks out. Simple as that. Over and over, these apparitions, like there was this girl who had Down syndrome, and she was a big Elvis fan, but she had a lot of health problems, and she didn't understand when Elvis died. But she was still a fan, but her issues got worse, and she was in her deathbed, and suddenly she looks up and she screams, "Elvis is here!" and then she passes away. So many more examples. I could just go on and on.
Isn't that amazing? You read some of those experiences and you think, okay, first of all, here's a guy who doesn't have to go around doing this stuff in the afterlife, but even after he's done what he did in this life to try to entertain as many people as he could and give to as many people as he did, he's still reaching out in the afterlife trying to help as many people as he can.
Yeah, or he appears in heaven as sort of a guardian for those who've had near-death experiences, including his stepbrother, Billy Stanley, and others. He will appear at the doorway and he'll say, your mission ain't over. I'm here to tell you, go back and do this and this and that. So, yeah he is taking mythological, divine states that you rarely see with figures in history, and he's still appearing in people's dreams and visions, and he's still around. He is the personification of America's soul, and he's America's magician. He's America's caretaker, and he's not going to go away because he's got messages.
That's true. That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. Well, you know what, Miguel, on that, that's probably a good place for us to wrap this program and let people go get the book and read about everything that is Elvis and the Occult Elvis. The name of the book is The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King. There's so much more to read in this book about Elvis's life and that side of Elvis, because there's so much more in there. Elvis's dive into Gnosticism, why Elvis is really a shaman, and his everything about Elvis and that side of Elvis that really we don't know much about, but there is everything in there to learn in Miguel's book. Miguel, any last thoughts before we leave people today?
No, not really. Again, the book also shows a lot of the darkness in Elvis's life, and there are sections that talk about addiction. For people to get help, I give various lenses on why Elvis fell, from alchemy to Steiner to Alcoholics Anonymous to Carl Jung, different ways so we can see if there are lessons in our lives, and also to see what a multidimensional figure he was. So yeah, we've only scratched the surface of all the rise and fall of Elvis and all the powers of fate and the gods that were working through him, and maybe even aliens.
That's right. We didn't even talk about aliens either. So there's that as well. And in Elvis's alien experiences, we want to leave that for the book as well. So I want to thank you, Miguel, for being on the program. And again, go get The Occult Elvis, The Mystical and Magical Life of the King. Miguel, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Folks, a couple of notes before we leave you today. The Darkness Radio Apple app is available. It's been updated for iOS 18. I believe we're on 18.5 right now. Go get it at the Apple Store if you don't have it updated or you don't have it on your Apple device. Go do that right now. If you're just listening to this podcast right now and you're not watching it on video, by all means, go to YouTube. The Original Darkness Radio is the name of the channel, or just simply go to darknessradioshow.com and click on this show and watch the video that accompanies this particular program, or any program that you'd like to see instead of just listen to. You've got two different avenues there as well. Want to thank Troy Palmer, who's the executive producer of this program. Troy, thank you for everything you do. And lastly, folks, we're on the weekend here. It is summer. You may have a neighbor out there who is elderly or disabled, who may need your help, maybe needs some yard work done or needs something done around the house, some cleaning or whatnot. Please go be a light in someone's darkness this weekend. Go help someone out there who is your neighbor, family member, or friend who is elderly or disabled. Please be a light in someone's darkness this weekend. A message from your friends here at Darkness Radio. For Mally Fox, for Jessica Freeberg, for Beer City Bruiser, I'm Tim Dennis. Thank you so much for listening and watching the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.